Alright, welcome back everybody. I want to do a quick video talking about the difference between the terms equality and equity. I was talking about this on Facebook with a friend, and it's important that we distinguish the difference between the two. And on the right side of your screen, this is live right now in DC, and for about the past hour, the lefties have been lined up with their shields, and very blatantly you can see the reporters communicating with them and basically doing a photo op. They're completely surrounded by police. They're not in any need of doing the Roman shield formation. I don't know why they're doing that. Well, we know why. It's propaganda. Let's listen in. Okay. We'll keep an eye on it. On the left side of your screen is the Maine communityfoundation.org, which is another one of these foundations. Remember, that's kind of a red flag word in this day and age, foundation. And, you know, just a generic example of what these Southern Maine foundations do. Check this out. They have a racial equity page, not equality, equity. Vision. All people in Maine have access to opportunities and life outcomes that are not determined or predictable in any way by race or ethnicity. There are more than 75,000 people living in Maine who identify themselves as other than white. These people of color are of Native American, Asian, Arabic, African, and Latino descent, and they live in every country in the state. People of color are not new to Maine. They have lived here for hundreds of years, and for some groups, tens of thousands of years. People of color have been, and continue to be, active community members and dynamic contributors to Maine's economy. Okay. Despite this, research shows, guys, here we go, no footnote, research shows that across Maine, people of color encounter significant barriers that negatively impact their health and economic well-being. What? This is one of the most peaceful, sovereign states on planet Earth. Maine? You're going to tell me, without a footnote, that in Maine, people of color encounter significant barriers that negatively impact their health and economic well-being. They make less money, they live shorter lives, and face obstacles to accessing and engaging in Maine's civic and economic life. It is critical that we invest in strategies that will call attention to race-based barriers and help correct the systems and practices that create them. By doing this, we will strengthen communities across Maine and will benefit all Maine people. Okay. Guys, this is the same playbook that was used throughout the 20th century, believe me, in every communist and socialist nation on this plane we live on. This is nothing new. Just take a moment and ask yourselves, fellow Mainers, do you know a racist? I don't. Believe me. I mean, I should, because I'm a right-wing news commentator, right? They would want you to think I would know. No, I've never even met a racist. Can't think of one, honestly. It's crazy. I can't think of any situation in my life where any of this is true. None of it. Let's hear what this lady has to say.
For this webinar.
Oh, it's an hour.
Our goal for today.
Clear disparities by race in Maine in terms of economic well-being. And so we needed to do something related to that. That was a big sticking point. And then the other big thing that people mentioned is that we really need to build white allies, that work on racial equity cannot be done by BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color on their own. If we could solve the problem on our own, we would have done it a long time ago.
Okay, wow. That was shocking. Didn't take long to get cancer with that one. This is modern warfare. There's a great TikTok going around with a young blonde lady, and she's talking about how World War III, in everybody's mind, we've been programmed to think that the next great war will be with tanks and guns and armies on the field. It's not true. It's not true at all. And this girl on TikTok goes on to say that World War III, if and when, will be an information war. It will be a war in the minds of people. There's no need for conventional armies when you can just win the war by brainwashing the people. And that's what we're living through right now. And that's what this Maine, what is this called? Community Foundation organization is. And that's the line she is touting right here. She's an agent. She's an operative. This is literal warfare. This is World War III, and it's a war of the minds. Nothing these people say makes any sense whatsoever. Wow, and there's just so much here. Okay, let's look at the next one. This is portlandmaine.gov, Racial Equity Steering Committee. I went straight to the document, guys. Check this out. The word race or racial, those words are used 31 times. Shall we take a look? Oh boy. This is bad, guys. City of Portland, City Council. Resolution establishing a racial equity steering committee to develop recommendations in response to systemic inequities. And we'll go into the terms after we look at this a little bit. Whereas, during its years as both a part of the state of Mass and before that as a colonial territory of Great Britain, and continuing in the first 45 years of statehood, the state of Maine was governed by rules that allowed slavery, and it had residents who were slave owners, slave traders, and slaves. Whereas, the practice of slavery does violence to the dignity of human beings made onto property, and that violence continues to haunt American society to this day. Whereas almost all of the 400 years of Black America's experience was under slavery and Jim Crow laws, both of which allowed preferential opportunity to some, while at the same time subjected blacks and people of color to hardship and disadvantage in all areas of life. Wow, you guys. Whereas, during the Civil War, Maine sent its soldiers to fight with the Union against the Confederacy, and their courage and sacrifice helps make possible an end to the practice of slavery in the United States. There's a little bit of mockery for you, because the same political party that was the Confederacy is writing this. It's the same political party. Literally, nothing changed. They talk about Jim Crow, and they talk about preferential opportunity for whites. This was all done by the same political party that's writing this document. Unbelievable. Okay. Whereas, oh my gosh, they're going to talk about Juneteenth. Whereas on June 19th, 1865, black slaves in the city of Galveston, Texas, finally learned that the Civil War had been won and they were free and slaves no more. And on June 19th, has been recognized around the country as Juneteenth in honor of this historic day. Wow, let's look up the word equity. This is crazy, you guys. 13 uses of equity. Of course, in the title. Okay. Therefore, be it resolved that Mayor Snyder and members of the Portland City Council hereby establish a racial equity steering committee to examine city systems, policies, and procedures and make recommendations to address and respond to systemic racism. And further resolved that the racial equity steering committee will be charged with reviewing the city's approach to public safety, including but not limited to. So they're putting a racial equity steering committee in charge of public safety. That translates to a small group of people with power, an oligarch in charge of policing. That's what that means. We're at war, you guys. This is war. These people need to be removed from office immediately. These people are treasonous. They're enemies of this country. Absolutely. No more second guessing. Racial Equity Steering Committee in charge of the city's approach to public safety, including but not limited to 1. An examination of the ever-expanding role we, as a city, have asked the police to play in our community, ranging from responding to noise complaints, traffic violations, and violent crime to conducting wellness checks and responding to behavioral health calls and drug overdoses, and whether we have provided them with the appropriate resources to accomplish this work. So this means gutting the police, basically. If our police are even legitimate, or they're probably oath breakers at this point, but if they are legitimate, this will gut them. 2. The way in which the city interacts with area agencies, organizations, and nonprofits in the name of public safety. Okay, how many agencies, organizations, and nonprofits have we exposed on this channel? Right? Whether it's all the CDC-related ones, the Epidemiological Intelligence Service, whether it's the one we just looked at, right? These foundations and organizations. So basically just more shareholder talk. So they're going to allow shareholders to have a role in public safety. It says nothing about government agencies. No, it just says agencies. It just says organizations, and it just says nonprofits. It doesn't say anything about elected officials, nothing, no. Their own private people will be in charge of public safety to make sure that racial equity is a thing. Recommending changes as necessary to various policy structures and procedures related to public safety that may disproportionately impact black people and other persons of color, with a specific aim of improving community relations, establishing mutual trust and respect, and rooting out and ending systemic racism. Wow, powerful line. Powerful way to end it. Rooting out and ending systemic racism. So what is defined as systemic racism, right? We just looked at how USM has a common read, they're calling it. It's basically USM's Bible that all the faculty and all the students are circling around and holding up with high regard. And it's called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And the whole book, the structure of what he writes it's awful. It's horrible. It makes no sense. The argument is completely fallacious. It's laughable, honestly. It's laughable to anybody with a brain. But it's the Bible that USM, the school, is holding up in Portland. And it'll teach people how to end systemic racism. It'll teach people how to identify systemic racism. That quote was actually used on USM's website. They took one quote from Ibram Kendi's book in this thing we were just reading in the last episode. And it's pretty clear. It talks about how to identify and demolish, I believe the word was demolish, how to demolish racism. So guys, they're gonna decide what's racist. They're gonna decide what systemic racism is, right? It's not gonna be a voting thing. It's not gonna be like a community thing. It's going to be an equity council thing, steering committee. This is not good. These are enemies of our country, absolutely, and they're starting to put things on paper that clearly show us we need to remove them immediately. And if the police don't want to help, police don't want to help. But I'm just putting my 2 cents in. You know, as somebody who follows and studies all this stuff, we are completely subverted. We are at war, definitely. A. B. Our local area is completely subverted. C. Our police force is either I, subverted, or I, working with these people. Or just scared. They could just be scared. But it's not looking good. It's not looking good. Hopefully the police are just like thinking they're in a pickle and they're trying to figure out what to do. But I don't know. It doesn't look good in Portland. Okay, further resolve that the Racial Equity Steering Committee will consist of no fewer than 9 members and no more than 13, all of which will be appointed by the mayor. Chill. With input from the city council and shall include a range of stakeholders. Wow. I've never read this before. What a effing surprise. Stakeholders, once again. From the Portland community who are doing racial equity work, such as representatives from the city council, Portland public schools, public safety, housing, healthcare, employment, education. Okay, once again, anybody. Anybody can be a stakeholder. Further resolve that the Racial Equity Steering Committee will elect leadership from among its membership. I don't care. This is so bad, you guys. Let's keep looking. Ugh. Not good. Not good. Check this out. Further resolved that the City Council hereby requests that the Portland Public Art Committee, which is responsible for administering the public art program collection and reviewing potential gifts of art to the city's collection. Guys, this is the literal ministry of propaganda. I swear I've never read this, but this is so obvious. This is literally just a ministry of propaganda. Are you kidding me? Portland Public Art Committee? Do I have to open up a folder and show you all the propaganda? The thousands of posters, the flags, the canvas, big banners. I'm sure the Portland Public Art Committee is behind that. That makes perfect sense. It's propaganda. This is a propaganda ministry, just like Joseph Goebbels had in Nazi Germany. Just like every socialist and communist country has. Germany was socialist during that bad stretch of years. Further resolve that Mayor Snyder and the City Council request that the city manager appoint a neutral third party. Okay, just establishing more power. Wow, this is disgusting. absolutely disgusting. I guess we should look at the definitions now, right? Here is, let's see, let's start with Google, right? We've got to start with the modern. Equity. 1. Noun. The quality of being fair and impartial. I think we know what fair means. Oh, look, it's lunchtime at the protests. BLM. We know what fair means. What does impartial mean? Impartial means treating all rivals or disputants equally, fair and just. That's important. We're talking about equity, right? With the T, equity. Equity involves being impartial to everybody. So that literally means treating all rivals or disputants equally, fair and just. It doesn't say all people, or no, I'm sorry, it doesn't say all your friends, it doesn't say all the people that agree with you, it doesn't say everybody who voted your way. No, it's treating your rivals and your disputants equally, fair and just. So what equity really means is the same outcome. The same outcome no matter what. Doesn't matter if you're rivals, doesn't matter. No, nothing matters. It's completely equal outcome. Everybody gets the same outcome. That's equity. Let's look at equality. Noun. The state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. Equality is a great thing when you're talking about society, right? You want equality because you want the state, right? Think of the word state. You want the state of the state to be equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunity. That's why we call it a state. Doesn't that make sense, right? A state of being, a state of a country. So we want the state, meaning the entity itself, Maine, we want it to be equal in its status, rights, and opportunities. We want equality, of course. We have equality. It's on the books on my bed behind me. We've had it. It's in there. We don't receive it all the time, especially if you want to work right now without a face mask because of your religious views. We don't always get equality, but it's a lot better than equity, right? Okay, that makes sense. Equal. Let's look up the word equal. 1. Adjective. Being the same in quantity, size, degree, or value. 2. Having the ability or resources to meet a challenge. And then noun. A person or thing considered to be the same as another in status or quality. Cool. So the root word equal refers to both, obviously, right? It's the root word. So it can refer to literally quantity in size or degree or value, or it can refer to status or quality, status or quality, right? So it depends on what you throw on the end of the word equal. Equity, well, you changed a little bit, but equity, everybody gets the same thing. Equality, everybody gets the same opportunity. That's a good way to remember it, right? Let's go back in time, though. So let's go to the 1886 dictionary and read about equity. Let me zoom in a little more. Okay. It comes from the Latin aequitas, and equity 1, justice, impartiality. So right off the bat, the definition of equity is impartiality. We look at impartial, treating all rivals or disputants equally, fair and just. It's kind of like that proverb or whatever, like whatever extreme measure you want to take against these people protesting on the screen, you know, if you do that to them, they can do it back to you, right? So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. That's a good way to put it, a double-edged sword. Okay, the giving or desiring to give to each man his due according to reason and the law of God to man. Okay, so giving or desiring to give each man his due according to reason. So that means according to somebody's reason, everybody's going to get a due. A due is like the totality of what you're going to receive. Let's say it's your universal basic income, right? So your universal basic income is going to depend on the reason of somebody above us, somebody in government. You know what I'm saying? And in order to have equity, like our politicians are saying, they're going to have to come to a conclusion where everybody gets X amount of something. Whether that's policing, X amount of health care, X amount of universal basic income, X amount of food rations. It's not going to be up to us anymore. It's going to be up to a small group, an oligarchy, according to their reason. What they decide, right? And then it says after that, and the law of God to man. Well, which God? Which God do you think the Portland politicians worship? I know which one. Okay, it continues to say, distinguished from justice in requiring a more perfect standard than any positive enactment or custom. Interesting. The quality of being equal-handed or just, even-handed action. So same across the board. Same result for everybody. Then it goes on to talk about its more legal term, equity, as in like property and mortgage and stuff. But yeah, equity, everybody gets the same. Now, it can be traced from French to whatever PR is, Protestant, I don't know, Italian, back to Spanish, Portuguese, and then finally to Latin. We don't have a Greek root, but we do have Latin, aequitas from aquis, meaning even or equal. So at the very origin of equity, it's always meant equal and even. Okay. Now, if we go to the Latin dictionary, and we go back even further in time, let's check this out. Aequitas. Okay. The quality of being aquis. The uniform relation of one thing to others. Equality, conformity, symmetry. So, all the ways back to Latin. Aequitas, equity. The uniform relation of one thing to others. Uniform, the same. The same for everybody. Just like the Soviet Union, or just like China today. You want to live in the same cube as everybody else? You want to drive the same car? You want to pick between the same 3 boots? You know what I mean? That's equity. That's equity. And I have more damning proof that equity equals socialism coming up. But yeah, equitas, going back to the origin of the word equity, the uniform relation of one thing to others. Equality, conformity, symmetry. Symmetry means reflected exactly the same, right? 2 sides that are the same. It uses the term equality here because equity can be done in a good way. Absolutely it can be. Like the way our policing is supposed to work is with equity. They're supposed to, distribute policing in an equitable manner across the whole land, right? I mean, I guess, of course that doesn't happen, but you know what I mean. All right, it continues. Here's a sub-definition. Just or equitable conduct towards others. Justice, equity, fairness. Governed by benevolence, while justitia yields to another only what is strictly due. So yes, that's a good point. If governed by benevolence, equity can be good, but we're not being governed by benevolence. We're being governed by communist infiltrators or really dumb people or a mixture of the both. Okay. Let's see. Here's another sub-definition. A quiet, tranquil state of mind, evenness of temper, moderation, calmness, tranquility, repose, equanimity. Interesting. I think we even have the root, though. Let me just make sure we're not missing anything here. Equity, just remember, is a quality of outcome. Equality is opportunity. Equality's good. We want equality, guys, not equity. Whenever you see equity, that you don't even have to read it. You just know that it's against American values and beliefs. Let's see what other examples we have here. Here's the Maine People's Alliance, and look at their symbol. Oh my gosh, if that's not the most Masonic thing I've seen today, unbelievable. It's two hands grasping each other, right? There's a lot of different hand things with the Masons. I have a book, but that'll take too long. I'm sure that's one. And it's in the Pentagon, of course, right? And it has the same luminaries emitting from it like you see on the Maine state seal and like you see on, above every Masonic temple. They always have the star radiating like this. Pentagon, five-pointed star, pentacle, pentagram. Unbelievable. Portland mayor appoints working group for 13-member racial equity steering committee. That's what we were reading. And then, clearly the BLM people aren't going to do anything. They're just eating lunch with their stupid shields, so we can go ahead and get rid of that. Check out what page I'm on. Social ownership. Redirected from citizen ownership of equity. This article is about the socialist concept. For other uses, see socialization. And you can see on the right here, let me move myself. You can see we're dealing with socialism. This page is part of a series on socialism. So let's take a look at what it says. I haven't read it, but I think it's going to wrap things up perfectly for this little discussion. I hope I made sense. Kind of did this on a whim. Okay, social ownership. It is a form of ownership for the means of production in socialist economic systems. These systems may encompass state ownership, employee ownership, cooperative ownership, citizen ownership of equity, common ownership, or collective ownership. Historically, social ownership implied that capital and factor markets would cease to exist under the assumption that market exchanges within the production process would be made redundant if capital goods were owned by a single entity or network of entities representing society. But the articulation of models of market socialism, where factor markets are utilized for allocating capital goods between socially owned enterprises, broadened the definition to include autonomous entities within a market economy. Social ownership of the means of production is the common defining characteristic of all the various forms of socialism. That's all you have to remember. That paragraph made absolutely no sense. But this last sentence, social ownership of the means of production is the common defining characteristic of all the various forms of socialism. Not some, all. Let's see where equity comes in. Under typology, there is a section called social ownership of equity. Okay. So already we've established that equity is an important concept in socialism. Social ownership of equity. The social ownership of capital and corporate stock has been proposed in the context of a market socialist system, where social ownership is achieved either by having a public body or employee-owned pension funds that own corporate stock. The American economist John Romer developed a model of market socialism that features a form of public ownership where individuals receive a non-transferable coupon, entitling them to a share of the profits generated by autonomous, non-governmental, publicly owned enterprises. In this model, social ownership refers to citizen ownership of equity in a market economy. James Juncker argues that public ownership of the means of production can be achieved in the same way private ownership is achieved in modern capitalism, using the shareholder system. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Stakeholder, shareholder system. Garbage. Okay, using the shareholder system, I'm going to say stakeholder, using the stakeholder system that effectively separates management from ownership. Juncker posits that social ownership can be achieved by having a public body, designated the Bureau of Public Ownership, or the BPO, own the shares of publicly listed firms without affecting market-based allocation of capital inputs. So according to Juncker, who isn't one of the thinkers behind social ownership of equity, there's going to be a designated Bureau of Public Ownership. Remember in the Webster Dictionary, right? I think it was in this one. Webster Dictionary. Okay. To give to each man his due according to reason. Remember how I mentioned that there would be a group in charge of the reason? Look at this. this Juncker guy's idea is that it can be achieved, this social equity can be achieved by having a public body designated the Bureau of Public Ownership. Doesn't that remind you a little bit of the Racial Equity Steering Committee? Okay. So this Bureau of Public Ownership is going to own all the shares of publicly listed firms without affecting market-based allocation of capital inputs, of course, and then they'd redistribute it to the people. Juncker termed this model pragmatic market socialism and argued that it would be at least as efficient as modern-day capitalism while providing superior social outcomes, as public ownership would enable profits to be distributed among the entire population rather than going largely to a class of inheriting rentiers. So, public companies, all their profits would be controlled by the Bureau of Public Ownership, and then the Bureau of Public Ownership would redistribute the profits of these companies to everybody equitably. It's just communism. No matter what way you want to dress it up, it's all the same thing. Classic Wikipedia. Okay. An alternative form of social ownership of equity is ownership of corporate stock through wage earner funds and pension funds. The underlying concept was first expounded upon in 1976 by the management theorist Peter Drucker, who argued that pension funds could reconcile employees' need for financial security with capital's need to be mobile and diversified, referring to this development as pension fund socialism. In Sweden, during the late 1970s, the Meidner program was advanced by the Swedish Social Democrat Party as a way to socialize enterprises through employee wage earners funds, which would be used to purchase corporate stock. Rudolf Meidner's original plan was to require Swedish companies over a certain size to issue shares equal to 20% of profits, which would be owned by wage earner funds controlled by employees through their trade unions. Once again, you can dress it up any way you want. So Swedish companies over a certain size, automatically 20%. So on top of the taxes they have to pay, another 20% of their profits will be taken. And then, through trade unions, that will be divided amongst the employees. So once again, whether it's the BPO, the Bureau of Public Ownership, or it's a trade union, they're going to steal 1/5 of your profits and redistribute it as they see fit. Yeah, wage earner funds controlled by employees through their trade unions. So basically what that says is wage earner funds controlled by trade unions given to employees. This plan was rejected and a watered-down proposal was adopted. Phew! Let's look up equity again. Oh, man. It's crazy. But yeah. Social ownership of equity. So you can see what equity is. Equity is a pillar of socialism. It's an important aspect of it, right? The whole idea of communism originally was to seize the means of production from the bourgeoisie and then equitably redistribute it to the proletariat. Simple as that. Equity is a red flag word. So when we see it all over the place, coming out of the Portland government, Southern Maine government, the governor of Maine, all over our country, all over our schools, it's bad. It's a red flag. It's very, very bad. It's communist. It's not looking good. All right. Thank you for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next episode.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air, and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.